So on our panel at the moment, we will present some of the key outcomes of the SENSEI project. We will discuss the overall concept of pay for performance and the model that we have developed. We will look at experiences from the US. We will also see what that might mean for implementing a pay-for-performance scheme in Catalonia. We will look at the important role of monitoring verification, and of course, how to set up the scheme. Let's all introduce ourselves before we do the presentation, so that we don't waste too much time. And I would suggest that we keep to the main points, as we're a bit running late. So I would like to present to you first, quite briefly, how SENSEI has proposed a framework for implementing pay-for-performance schemes in Europe. For those that joined late, my name is Philippos Anagnostopoulos, and I'm the coordinator of the SENSEI project. So we saw that, well, first of all, let's see that what SENSEI tries to do as a project. We want to investigate the use of these pay-for-performance schemes to see how to aggregate retrofit projects, improve the subsidy of the effectiveness of subsidy programs, and make energy efficiency something valuable for the grid as an alternative energy resource. And we see that there has been already quite some traction, at least on the policy level, both in the renovation waves where pay-for-performance schemes have been mentioned as a potential to attract private intermediaries, and also at the EU Save Energy communication from last spring of 2022 as a possible way to trigger further investment. So there's already a political drive, and we expect pay-for-performance schemes to be gaining still further influence on market actors in Europe. Basically, what we find in our project that these schemes could be doing is putting a price on energy efficiency, being very accurate at measuring savings, and this can improve existing subsidy schemes, allow the aggregation of projects to trigger larger investments, and of course recognize energy efficiency as a valuable addition to the power mix. We were inspired by quite a lot of things in the US. I will allow Dimitria to mention more on this, but the activities that our colleagues from the US have made are quite inspiring and are helping us in Europe as well. So what I want to say is that all of these have been possible due to advancements in monitoring verification 2.0. So essentially, this allows us to update the way we do business, the way we value efficiency, with more accuracy and reliability and transparency. And a major thing that the SENSEI project has managed to do is to deliver this open source toolkit for MNV that's based on machine learning algorithms called Insight. That is essentially an energy efficiency meter, which allows the valorization of energy efficiency, and based on that, we can build all sorts of different business models. So what can we actually build based on that? This is a very basic scheme in a way, but it allows us quite a good conceptualization of what could be happening. And I'll spend a bit more time on this. It's the main aspect of this brief presentation. So on the left-hand side, you see the various actors who might be interested to finance energy efficiency. So this can be, for example, the public fund for energy efficiency investment, subsidies essentially that are ongoing at the moment, where we put more money into retrofits, also through energy efficiency obligation schemes. Then we have power system operators, energy suppliers, that might need more stability for the grid or to defer investments for costly upgrades. And they might also be interested in demand-side resources. And we also have financial institutions, investors, that might want a more stable long-term return on investment. And here we speak something rather modest, 4% or so. But that's still like what you would get from quite a few markets. And if it's a more stable return, then a lot would actually prefer it. And we're speaking of, yeah, organizations that look at the long term. And then on the right-hand side, we have this system for exploiting the energy efficiency potential. A central figure there is the energy efficiency aggregator. So what this entity does is that it bundles together a large number of energy efficiency projects into portfolios and then attracts financing from the system that we mentioned on the left-hand side. This financing, which is the blue arrows in this graph, can then be transferred to ESCOs that know very well how to implement measures in buildings. And then these implemented measures generate savings. The savings are measured with, let me also point. So we have financial flows coming from the partners on the left-hand side. The aggregator matches these with ESCOs who can actually deliver works in the building sector, and they find the appropriate buildings where these measures can take place. ESCOs know through their experience with energy performance contracting which measures to implement, what's the payback period, what makes sense and what not, depending on the building type, and so on. Where pay for performance becomes interesting is that this flow is not anymore dependent on assumed savings. We actually measure the savings. We know exactly what value they generate. And through MNV, we know exactly then what the building owners or whomever in the system actually needs to pay back for the service they receive. So I would like to offer an example of how this could actually take place. This is the example of using energy efficiency as a demand-side energy resource. And I will go step by step of the various steps that could take place. This is a theoretical system, by the way, based on what's happening in the US. So we could have an actor in the power system, and let's say this is a DSO that issues a tender for aggregators and asks them to reduce the overall energy demand from the grid or from a specific location. One of these aggregators can be successful in their bid and has this bid where they can go to financial institutions, get the necessary financing to then invest to ESCOs and buildings. What the aggregator can then do is also take data from the DSO, look at which buildings are the ones that are better suited either in terms of location or consumption or building characteristics. And then in partnerships with the ESCOs, go and target these specific buildings that offer high potentials for energy savings or because of their location in the grid, and that can be beneficial to, for example, avoid building new substations or putting in new wires. Now, how would the remuneration take place? Of course, with the financing from financial institutions through the aggregators, ESCOs will undertake the first step of the works. But eventually, how well this job is done will depend on the actual metered energy savings. And then the cash flow would come, in this case, from a DSO back to the aggregator based on what has already been saved. So this is, of course, a first model of how things could be taking place. It's not definite. And it's important to note that such a model doesn't really emerge bottom up. It requires regulatory action, it requires obligations, it requires a market facilitator to speak with these various parties and come to agreements on monitoring and verification and what is needed. And of course, it will be different depending on the member state, depending on the previous experience, depending on the maturity, the availability of financing and so on. But in this way, essentially what you have is that buildings do get upgraded without any upfront payments from the building owners. It's a very attractive proposition. ESCOs and the contractors are incentivized to do quality work because it's based on the quality of works that they will eventually be remunerated. The power system operators, DSO in this case, doesn't need to expand the grid or do other aspects. They can invest in demand-side measures, also in line with the efficiency first principle. And then you also have financial institutions that get a very stable return on their investment that can very accurately be tracked, and it will of course count towards the ESG obligations and so on. Various financial products could come out of this availability of measurements. So that's the general idea of pay for performance and how it can be implemented in to support the energy system. What is needed for us to get there is, first of all, commitment at a high level, regulatory level, like there need to be obligations. We need facilitation, which is an energy agency or another competent authority to help set up this market. And of course, it will require quite a few iterations. We need a robust monitoring and verification system. For example, Insight or Caltrack in the US, that is able to measure the savings and distinguish noise, distinguish user behavior, and so on. We need procurement to pick the right aggregators, best value for money, and so on. And of course, evaluate the system and repeat it again. So in brief, this is what we have prepared as a SENSEI project. We do hope that it offers some inspiration for how things can be evolving in the near future, especially with the update of the relevant directives. So that's all on my side. This has been the consortium of the SENSEI project. Everyone has been quite contributing to this effort. And for the ones online, if there's anything you might need, please either click on these links. You will also find them later on when we send you the presentations and the relevant material, and also get in contact. So thank you very much. Does anyone have a quick question perhaps before we move ahead? Please.
So Katarzyna Wardal-Schmidt, Knauf Insulation. Great. We came back to the scheme. I have a question on this. So DSOs here, we can see that. Do you think that for them, have you spoken to them? Have you checked it already? That energy efficiency competing traditional power and energy resources will be interesting enough in this system? Shouldn't we think of something like a feed-out tariff for energy efficiency, paying for energy savings in the energy system, where there would be a clear interest, such as it has been done in the past for renewables, like feed-in tariff? Because here I'm just wondering whether the incentive will be clear enough for them to look at energy savings as a real alternative to energy supplied energy to customers. So in general, in this scheme, first of all, have you checked it somewhere? Does it really work? And can we be sure that, I'm coming back to the question of Robert Pernetta in the beginning, that this time it will be different, that really the different parts of the energy system would really prioritize energy savings and see it as a real alternative to energy supply. Yeah. To say energy sales.
So if I understand correctly, basically, wouldn't it be better to have a simple feed-in tariff for energy efficiency measures?
Yes.
Yes, that should be a first step. They're not mutually exclusive. I would say it's a first step towards the same direction. Eventually, though, we do have the technical capabilities to measure the performance of energy efficiency assets. And we could see them being used as an energy resource, as infrastructure, and so on. So yes, I agree with you. We can definitely start with that. But the monitoring of savings will allow more fruitful, let's say, business models to emerge, and being able to accurately valorize what has been implemented. There was another part of your question, though, I think.
No, that was the main question, but I agree that here metered savings, proven savings will be key.
Yeah.
I think in the EPBD directive, there is a provision now in the recast, in the discussions, to have energy real performance certification to prove energy savings. So maybe there is already something to be connected to. I don't know, you have this open source. I think this is something that can be used by ESCOs, but there might be a system that would certify at the European level such
certain. So the model, by the way, is open source, where we can do MNV, and there have been discussions with market actors that help certify. So this is a very positive development. And it should also be mentioned that these systems emerge out of a need. Nobody does them for their own sake. And with more introduction of heat pumps, electric vehicles, and so on, and the demands of the grid on heating, we will need to cut down our demand on certain sectors. So here we're laying out the groundwork for what will come in 5 years' time, or hopefully sooner. And as we will see in the latest presentations, we're already taking some steps. So, thank you for the questions. Let's proceed.
Hello, everyone. My name is Dimitra Jani, and I'm a research associate at the Institute for European Energy and Climate Policy. I've been working on SENSEI for 3 years now, so I'm there since the beginning, let's say. I've been mainly involved in the policy analysis and the business analysis of the P4P schemes. And today I will mainly present to you the key takeaways that we had from interviews and from the research that we had done in the US from similar projects. So a very brief, let's say, intro to the policy, because I think that you have already heard enough. You all know about the renovation wave and the target about doubling the annual energy renovation rates by 2030, and an estimate of about 35 million buildings being renovated by then. Also now with the Fit for 55 package, the ambition on decarbonizing the building sector is really higher in order to reach both the 2030 and the 2050 targets of the Commission. However, despite the policy context being in place and the very strict, let's say, obligations from the EC, we have seen that the renovation rates remain really low, especially to the hard, let's say, to reach sectors, for example, the residential one. And mainly from our research, the main barriers hindering the wide uptake of energy efficiency measures are the high upfront costs, the high financial risks, the limited payback expectations, and the uncertainty regarding the energy savings. So researchers, market actors, the Commission, everyone agrees that the need for public funding programs is real, and we will need substantial private sector involvement in order to finance all these, let's say, renovations. So we have seen many schemes, financing schemes being researched and being piloted in the EU. We have on-bill schemes, we have mortgage schemes, now we have P4P schemes. We have seen that they have been, as Philippos mentioned, they have been included in both the renovation wave communication and also in the EU Save Energy. And the strong, let's say, aspect and the difference of these schemes from the other is the metered savings and the fact that we rely on verified savings. So as Philippos also explained in more detail, P4P schemes is a way to achieve significant and large-scale energy savings. And despite the, let's say, the very good aspects that they have, we see that they currently lack in the EU, but they have been so far piloted, and we have seen a lot of programs being implemented in the US. So the first step when we started the SENSEI project was to see the design aspects of the schemes in the US, what were the drivers, why were the schemes designed there, and how the different actors collaborated during the implementation of them in the US. When we first started searching about them, we were really confused about which one to keep in our research and which findings and which programs we should further investigate and also conduct interviews with responsible actors. The main keys that we had in mind was to actually have a relation between the performance and the remuneration, and the savings to be relied on being actually metered. And another thing that we had in mind was that we were looking for aggregated projects at most of the times instead of single ones. So keeping these, let's say, filters in mind, we identified these 11 programs, 10 in the North America and 1 in Germany. Most of the program administrators were system operators or energy utilities, but we identified also programs that were administered by public authorities, for example, the regional authority Bayren in California. Another very key finding about the scheme was that they were often in the context of an energy efficiency obligation, the energy efficiency resource standards, as they are called in North America. And actually, most of the time, the policymakers were obligated, let's say, the utilities to bring 5 or 10% of their savings through innovative schemes or through metered savings. So this was the main incentive for all these actors to start piloting these programs. Another key finding was that the majority of these schemes mainly included large commercial buildings, but we also see that there were some small and commercial buildings in Aysirda and Bayren, and at that time, the only one residential was the PG&E in California. However, recently we identified that another pay-for-performance program was launched that was like 2 years ago, or was starting to be implemented also by Aysirda and the National Grid system operator in New York. And they were trying also to have a residential pay-for-performance program there using the Caltrack methods. I will not dive in these MLV methods because Sotiris will analyze it more there. And also by embracing an aggregator model of P4P. Just to have an idea about the schemes, these are the 2 schemes, the residential ones, the one administered by BCND and the one administered by Aysirda and the National Grid. In the case of Aysirda is just a national state authority, so it is not a utility or a system operator. And as you can see, they do not really get the grid benefits, but they are the facilitator with the payments and the savings, and they are somehow working as a facilitator between the MNV operator, Recurve, and the national grid, which is the grid operator. And in PG&D, on the other side, is the one cooperating directly with Recurve in the California scheme. We see that in California, the scheme currently targeted 4,200 households, while in New York, they started smaller with only 1,500 households. This is very small proportion of the households they serve. For example, National Grid has over 2 million of customers. So we can see here how important it is to start working on the schemes very small to see how it works and what doesn't work, and then scale up more. Another thing that is very important to highlight here is the role of the aggregator in both schemes. We see that in both the schemes, since they target the residential sector, so we talk about very small households, it's really important to have there the presence of an aggregator that aggregates all these single projects into portfolios. This is mainly for the schemes. What we did then is to try to identify from the actors that we identified in the US, how these actors could work in the scheme here in Europe. Philip was already, I think, explained this very well, so I don't want to spend more time on this here. And I would like to present the different monetary relations and financial risks between the traditional programs and P4P programs, because many of you, when we discuss about it, ask, okay, what is the difference for customers or for the program administrators when we're talking about a traditional program or a P4P program? One main difference for the customers is that yes, they receive an upfront incentives in most of the time in traditional ones, and it might seem scary when in P4P programs they will get it only on the verified savings. But the truth is that in most of the cases, the aggregator or the energy provider is taking the low performance risk and not the customer. So it doesn't seem so scary as it might seem in most of the people. For the implementers, ESCOs, aggregators, or other service providers, they have a greater risk, but they also can target more sectors like the small and medium enterprises and the residential one. And in case they do not perform, they may receive lower payments, or they may have to do more actions in order to achieve additional savings. A very important aspect between the traditional programs and the difference between the traditional programs and the P4P programs is the taxpayers and ratepayers' money, because for the traditional programs, we see wasting of money or public funding for savings that we don't know if have been materialized. But for P4P programs, taxpayer funds are used only for verified savings. Then some of the benefits, this goes also, I think, for the previous question, is that why should customers, why should aggregators, or why should utilities get in this trouble of getting away from the traditional programs and getting into the P4P ones? From the interviews that we had with the administrators in the US, we see that for the aggregators and the contractors, the main benefits were the minimized transaction costs and less administrative burden. And also, it was easier for them to manage the risk and the performance at the portfolio level. For utilities, many utilities in the US, because they have a lot of problem with their grid stability, the greatest incentive was to elevate energy efficiency as a utility resource with potential and temporal and location impacts, but also seeing the longer-term visibility into the system impacts of the energy efficiency. Then, also about the customers, is that they may not receive in some of the programs an upfront investment, but they can choose a lot of different solutions, for example, also behavioral measures, and they can have a stable, let's say, cash flow from implementing a P4P program. These are indicative payment structure that we collected through our interviews, and also from the discussion that we had with the implementers. We see that in most of the programs, in order to attract more customers at the beginning, the program was not pure pay for performance, but it was kind of hybrid, which means that the customer received an initial payment at the beginning of the program, for example, 25% or 30%, and then the rest of the program would be based only on performance. We also see that each program has a different price setting that was set after discussing a lot with the stakeholders and with the market actors in the region. And the same goes also for the payment schedule and for the contract duration. We see that contract duration may vary from 1 year to 5 years, depending on what the stakeholders and what the customers were more preferable. These are the main ones. Some key takeaways that we had from all this is that we should start piloting small programs in order to see what works and doesn't work in our regions, because each region, each country, each state works different. Same goes also for the involvement of stakeholders. Stakeholders in different regions want different things, so we should also include the stakeholder engagement process and listen to what the market actors want. Otherwise, our programs won't work. Focus on precise and detailed measurement rules. I think that the key takeaway of the whole SENSEI is that in order to have standardized process and easy tools that can help us have verified savings. And a very important one that also the administrators highlighted is to integrate well with broader climate and energy objectives. For example, we should think, how can we integrate it in P4P programs, the energy poverty aspect, or how we can also target other things like the EPCs or like minimum energy performance standards, so that it will be easier using the stick and the carrot to implement these programs. I had a lot to say, but I did not have time, so I will go straight to the end. And sorry, I would like to show you that these key findings have already been publishable in the Renewable Sustainable Energy Reviews journal, so you can find more of this there and in our presentation. And of course, visit our SENSEI project, all the social media channels and the LinkedIn ones. And we also have 2 more projects now being in ICP that have to do with performance guarantees and also with energy performance contracting. And we will try to leverage the findings from SENSEI in order to continue working on these projects. So this is it. Sorry for the long time. Any questions or comments? Yes.
So a lot of this focuses on designing a kind of regulatory architecture for pay-for-performance systems to emerge in Europe. But my question is what's the scope for European, essentially European startups to emerge into this space? So obviously there's a lot of emphasis on Recurve, essentially providing M&V analytics and being that kind of service provider. Do you see do you almost see this the regulatory design that you're envisaging as kind of building a space for a company like Recurve to come into the European market, or as fostering kind of European startups to compete?
Yes, thank you. First one, not so much for the small enterprises, but for example, it goes for the previous question about the DSOs, is the energy efficiency first principle, because we hear it a lot. I also got my presentation. We hear a lot about it, but it never was materialized and substantiated before. But now with the new revisions, we have a new article, so making it more strict, that the first thing that you have to do before any other decision is that you have to do your building super energy efficient. So I think that when you do this and when you practically going to take this into consideration in all your buildings, even the small and medium enterprises, and every decision you have to take first will be that I have to do the energy efficient action first. So for me, doing the energy efficient first principle, a really strict article, like I saw there being the stick in this case, I think it will be a very important case to promote schemes like on-bill schemes, pay-for-performance schemes, all these new mechanisms that we are researching. And as also, I think also the public sector will be very important, because it's easier to start and try such schemes there, because they're national, they're public buildings. It's easier for them to take the risk and start doing that there with public funding and try to test there what works and doesn't, and then go to, let's say, harder sectors like the residential one or like the small and medium enterprises. And the final one for the buildings and for the small medium enterprises, it's the minimum energy performance standards. I think that the stricter, I know that it sounds kind of bad and many will be against it, but the stricter, then the more the demand that we will create in order to go and find the most, let's say, the best way, the most cost-effective way to do these things. And if we would like to do some actions, for example, I would like to know that all the savings I have are verified and are actually being implemented, and I actually have a better EPC class. So I think that mainly this from my side. I hope I answered.
Thank you very much. And there's a lot of room for innovation, especially for more for younger organizations that want to take up risk, not so much from older, more established companies that tend to be more risk averse. Let's move on to the next presentation. So Johan Kuhler from Factor 4, and yeah, presentation. So
can I get the mic? Yes, but okay.
Yes.
Thank you. Yeah. Good morning. Yes. I'm Johan Kohle, managing partner at Factor 4. We are a company specialized in, amongst other, performance-based contracting, and that was actually also our role in this SENSEI project to bring in our practical experiencing in developing an EPC market, in concretely in Belgium. We are located in Antwerp, and how we can, let's say, transfer this lessons learned there to the P4P development that we are trying to realize now, and which has a lot of similarities with the EPC approach. Okay. Push the button. Okay, I will discuss shortly the difference between the models in the EU and the US, and then we designed actually a potential P4P model in Europe. I will talk a little bit about the main principles, on a very basic level today, because we don't have so much time. How we could implement it, and the possible link with a fund. Okay, thank you. Of course, in the US, let's say my impression, and I think is also confirmed by experts, is that there is sort of underinvestment in public infrastructure, and there is a bigger problem with the network congestion. In Europe presently, it's not, but it can change rapidly. Of course, if the share of renewables increases and you have much more electricity consumption of heat pumps in the winter, evidently the load and the capacity needed in the network and also the production plants is higher. Typically, of course, is in the US, the main driving actors are private companies, and in Europe, typically much more the government. And in both cases, there is non-recourse financing. What does it mean? Well, in the P4P program, the collateral, the thing that guarantees the payment is the energy saving. And that's it. Sometimes you have a cogeneration plant, and a financing company knows I can take this cogeneration plant and uses that as sort of guarantee that they will anyway pay back my loan. But in case of P4P, of course, it's a bit more limited. It's just energy efficiency. It's evidently less tangible. This generates evidently a big challenge for financing. But in the US, of course, they are always a bit more creative in financing. They're also a little bit less risk avertive. Even after the financial crisis, they start to bundle all kind of project-based financing. They call it securitization. In Europe, of course, there was a little bit, they learned a lesson, they will say, and they tend to keep this financing based on project level. Evidently, this one is the most efficient one, but it's also the most risky one. We are in the US, yes. Well, again, in the US, they try to reduce risks on project level by bundling it, and they just sell it again in a secondary market to specialize other financial actors. In Europe. Most of the financing will be organized on project level. Okay. We developed a P4P model. We, of course, looked to the research done by our colleagues of the SENSEI projects. Actually, two colleagues of me, Danny and Charles, they did quite some research in the financial sector. They surveyed experts in the financial sector. And based on that, and evidently our experience with EPC projects, we developed a possible P4P model that I will present in the following slides. What we learned also with EPC projects, and it was already mentioned several times, you have to start very simple. Don't try to make the most advanced, innovative P4P program the first. Just start simple. I think you can risk to take one, maybe two innovations in one step, but that's already a lot. even in the frame of public authorities, you don't want to risk that because you have too many innovations that because of one of the reasons you cannot manage anymore, the whole pilot projects becomes actually a failure, and then you will need a lot of time, probably years, to repair this situation. Well, the main objectives is, of course, CO2 emission reduction. That's really high on the agenda in Belgium and I think in most member states. And also load reduction, that's the second one. I just don't discuss in the slides here, but evidently we can use load reduction as a sort of financial source to finance the CO2 emission reduction. Anyway, if you do an energy efficiency projects, you like it or not, you will have an influence on the height of your electricity consumption and the shape of your electricity consumption, unavoidably. So if it's just there, just use these two potential financial sources and cost reductions to make your project more cost efficient. And evidently, we will bundle all these EE projects into a program. Actually, that's a big difference with an EPC project. Well, the projects that we currently do at Factor 4 that are projects of 10 buildings, 50,000 square meters. So you bundle already a lot of measures together. But here you're going to bundle big projects again in a program. Well, the aggregator, the name was already mentioned several times. Actually, what we expect that the aggregator will be in Europe, that will be actually the ESCOs from now, because in, let's say, 70% of the ESCOs in Belgium for sure are really big companies. I'm talking about Equans, that's their name, currently Coffee, former times, Luminous Solutions, maybe Honeywell, Veolia, big partners. And I think they are capable and they have experience also to manage this type of projects. And they will be paid on a no-nonsense basis based on the tasks. So that's the classic way of paying a contractor. You just say, I want you to perform a certain amount of tasks and you get your money. But the quality of the task is guaranteed because there was a second payment in function of a CO2 emission reduction. So it was also mentioned by the previous speaker that you have this hybrid structure in the US, and actually that's what we also would definitely recommend certainly in the first project to do, to pay them in function of two things. One, the first one is more input oriented. The other one is much more result oriented and evidently also much more risky. And then the biggest task of the aggregator will be to go on the market and to convince people to believe them and to implement the measures that they successful. We will be say that it will be very important that you do these measures, and they will have to convince all these individual actors to do it. I think that will be probably one of the most challenging tasks of this aggregator. And then there will be certainly in the second, third phase, and maybe also partially in the first phase financing. They will take care of the paperwork and administration, evidently, do the MNV, and that's one of the big advantages of a P4P contract, and so the aggregator to unburden the clients, the individual, all these individual economic actors from all this paperwork, measurements, complicated design of energy efficiency measures. He will offer this all together as a service, which is evidently much more interesting. If nowadays in Belgium, for instance, I want to renovate my building, I have to ask all kinds of subsidies, fill in all kinds of complicated subsidy forms, hopefully get my money. I will have to talk with an architect, all kinds of very complicated things I don't like in general, certainly not if the client has a non-technical background. So that's really a big advantage. Okay, so we designed actually starting from a white page again. We did that many times in the SENSEI project again. Here a new white page, and the green ones are, let's say, the public entities. So and the blue ones are the private entities. Here again, the aggregator. I will not discuss in detail all the financial flows and service flows that are there, but evidently, as you are with procurement, you need one public authority who takes care of the tendering. It's a European legislation, by the way, a framework. He will tender the aggregator, and then it will become a little bit a mystery. How this aggregator will do his job? He can use ESCOs, but we expect that certainly in the beginning, this aggregator will be also have ESCO experience themselves. So maybe they will just do it directly. Well, this is just one possibility. They put always an ESCO in between the economic agent. Okay, next slide. You use, by the way, the system operator because they have a sort of credibility. What we learned also by surveying financial actors, they like to hear and to see that there are really solid, maybe a little bit bureaucratic, but solid semi-public entities in a sort of structure that gives confidence for one reason or another. Sometimes I don't understand it, but this is how it works. And so you use them. Of course, they have a lot of data. And then here, there is a possibility of a fund. A fund, in our opinion, should be in the first phase and also in the later phases, a public fund and managed by officials. They actually go, there are completely other people than these guys there or the women there and public authority. These are really financial experts. They are not so really tech-minded, while these people are not so financial minded. By the way, these are also mainly technically focused people. Me have more economic technical background. I really don't, it's sometimes very hard for me to understand how financial people think. They think completely different. For them, it's the same. So that's really good to have it separate. And they go to the market, they are specialized in it, and they try to get the best financing possible for the different projects. Yeah. So the aggregator has to execute a minimal share of tasks described in the program that he described actually himself in the offer that he had to make. And he realizes CO2 reduction targets. Certainly in the beginning, we expected it will be very hard to forecast how much CO2 will be reduced. So we think that the best is to foresee a rather small, what we call a bonus malus. A bonus is extra money if you realize more than your target, and the malus is a sort of penalty. Typical concept of EPC projects. It's measured during a longer period, 5 years. And there are systems to reward investments of, let's say, 20 years with a higher bonus than other investments, than with short-term investments. So then, which is very important, if you want to renovate buildings, you need to incentivize the aggregator to take long-term measures. You should develop and integrate it in your rewarding system. 2 minutes, yes. Okay. Okay. So there is a malus if they don't succeed. And yeah, as explained, small bonus malus for sure in the first systems. Yeah. Okay. Okay, we discussed this already, remuneration. He will get 50% of his money because he just simply did his task, even if there was no CO2 reduction at all, at least that amount of money he will get. And the other 50% will be in a normal case because in function of the realized CO2 reduction. Yeah. And then there is a fund. I have 1 or 2 minutes. Okay. So actually there is, for each project, there is a risk profile of the actors where the aggregator will do his investments. There is a market reference rate. That's the typically of the European Central Bank, sorry, and the share of risks by the public authorities. And there's a sort of menu that the aggregator gets. He doesn't have to take care of all this funding. It's not his business. And he will try to find these type of projects that generate the lowest interest rate because that's in his advantage. And we expect a low interest rate for sure after 1 or 2 programs, because in the beginning they have to finance something that they never saw, so that will not work. You should show it on the field, and then the risk level will be reduced with, say, 70%. And advantage of scale, of course. And I think that's it. I have some other slides, but that's for another persons here.
Yeah, thanks for the great presentation. I was just wondering if you've spoken or had any conversations with any pension funds about potential interest in a scheme like this, and yeah, what the outcomes of those conversations might have been, if so.
Good question. I think we interviewed pension funds, but I'm looking to my colleagues who did this type of work, the more financial diehards. And so what is the outcome? Well, many outcomes actually. I don't know if some of you could summarize it. Well, what is for sure the fact that they are very interested and they're also very risk averse at the same time. So in the same sentence, you get this message. I will try to give some key lines. Well, I mentioned already the importance of having this distribution company inside of the whole this whole program. It generates confidence. I think one of the findings was also to start with public buildings. So really focus on the public buildings. So you avoid the innovation that I already mentioned, that you have to convince this private actor to believe you and to go for it and to do the investments that you want that they do. So that's an important one. Yes, Danny, yes, thank you. Thank you.
It was important we went to the agency was covering all the pension funds which are active. Because by all the member states, pension funds are differently organized. So we talked only to the Belgian agency. I think what was very important, usually pension funds are doing investments on a long term, like 25 to 30 years. If you look at P4P, then it's usually short term. It's like 3, 4, 5 years of investment. So that was one element which was brought forward. I think another element was like, we need the MNVs very detailed. We heard about today speaking about 24/7. That's great. But investors, of course, they want to periodically, not on a day-by-day basis, but on a monthly basis, for example, see we invested money in such a scheme. What is it worth? So MNV is important, but MNV has to lead to valuation. Valuation on the level of the project, but also valuation of the investment investors made. So that was important for pension funds because they cover the money of the different local workers, school teachers, things like that. So, and I think the big difference was the 30 years investment level, the horizon, and where these kind of projects are more shorter than the 30 years. But I think one solution was to have a revolving fund where they can keep bringing projects into. When certain projects are stopped after 4 or 5 years, you bring new projects in, and the investments, of course, continue when the performance is there. I think those were the two elements which were quite important.
And evidently, the conclusions of Danny and Charles, they are summarized in one of the deliverables, of which I forgot a number. D6, whatever. Sorry? 6.3.
6.3. Also another question, since you're an ESCO, so our ESCO known colleagues. So a question like, so Daniel asked, what is the real difference between the job of an aggregator and that of a large, and what a large ESCO does today? What about the role of public aggregators, such like Renovat in Belgium, facilitating and promoting pay for performance, but not directly involved in the risk? So I guess the first part of the question is relevant.
Yes, the Renovat, I know it more or less, is actually, they are sort of public facilitator, in my opinion. So they tender, as far as I know, it's located in the southern part of the country, but I know it relatively good. They publicly facilitate the projects and they don't take at the end the risks. It's and then there was, so the question is, what's the difference between an ESCO and an aggregator, more or less?
What a large ESCO does and what an aggregator could eventually do.
Yes, I think the aggregator, I expect that the first aggregators, they will be the big ESCOs because they are anyway big at the moment, or let's say a major part are smaller players, but let's say most of them are huge companies, so they really can do the job. And on top, they have to do the missionary work, which is the hardest job. We know we have Factor 4. We were missionary in EPC for many years, and we were not always successful, and certainly not at the beginning. It's really a tough one. And I expect that's actually the additional tasks that they have. Very interesting task, but I think it can work. It will work. But that's really an important additional one. Yes. Is that more or less the answer?
Yeah, good. Thank you very much. We're running a little bit behind on time, so we will move directly to our final two presentations. So the next one is from Sotis, and we will discuss the crucial aspect of monitoring and verification. Sotis Papadelis from Hibs Intelligence.
Yes. Okay. So, we have discussed a lot about measurement verification. Let's now discuss what it is. It's measurement verification. It's actually an impact assessment problem. So the idea is that you have a building, you go, you improve something, you upgrade the envelope, the technical systems, and then you go to compare. Say, I have consumption before, consumption after the intervention, what was the impact of the intervention? It's not that different from other cases where you have the same thing, you have an intervention and you want to estimate the impact. For instance, medicine, the drugs. And you may have observational data where you say that I see doctors giving this or that treatment and I want to isolate the actual impact. And IPMVP, which is the international standard for measurement verification, has 4 classes, A, B, C, D, 4 types of measurement verification. The most applicable for pay for performance is C, and C means let's create a statistical model. So it's a model that tries to predict energy consumption using occupancy-related information, trying to capture what happens inside the building, and occupancy-independent information, how the building reacts to external conditions such as outdoor air temperature. Why do we need MMV in pay for performance? I think it's obvious. Pay for performance, you need a way to measure. First of all, you define the performance, and then you need a way to measure it. And unlike installing solar panels, etc., we can actually have a meter and measure directly what is the impact of the measures, the installation. In energy efficiency, you have to estimate. And it's not something new in the sense that measurement verification exists when you're talking about energy performance contracting. You have a building, you have an ESCO. There must be an agreement on how the impact will be measured. What changes in pay for performance is that you need to upscale it. So things that may work well when you have one building may not work that well when you have a lot of buildings and you have a portfolio of them. And specifically, three aspects are important here. First, you want to require as less as possible human in the loop. So you don't want people to actually sit down and create detailed models of a building, etc. This makes sense for individual buildings. The moment you aggregate and you create portfolios, this is expensive. The second thing is that you want to adapt to changes. Things change inside the building, and you want to be able to capture them and correct them. And again, if you're talking about individual buildings, maybe you have the luxury to go inside, see what's happened, discuss with the building owner, find a way to update the model. The more you move away from the building and you only see a portfolio of them, you have to have this process in a more automated way. And the other thing is that practical MMV should be something completely different than the ESCO that implements the upgrade, etc. In the sense that it should be a trusted source of information that is shared among all the participants in the portfolio. So, what are the contributions of the project with regards to measurement verification? So we started with a specific deliverable. The initial idea behind the deliverable was to review what already exists. It turns out that the things that exist, or at least are open, and you can actually check them, are not that much. So there was scope for trying to create new things. Practically, there is only one model, the time of week and temperature. It's quite old model. Caltrac, that was mentioned, is a biased version of that. One other model that exists in practice is something that's used in MITS, in Seattle, for instance, but it's closed. So we never got to get information about how it works. It seems to be something like a Bayesian thing where you calibrate simple models. Anyway, we developed an initial version of the DINSIGHT tool, which based on predictions, how to improve predictions for energy consumption, really. We had discussions and model tests with people from Vivo, and at some point we revised the model and the methodology because we found out that prediction can only get you that far. At some point, you have to treat MMV as something different than just predicting consumption because it really is a different problem. And I will mention the book at the end also. So, what is the traditional MMV? Traditional, and the first, let's say, version of what we did in terms of methodology. You try to predict energy consumption. You say that as long as I can predict energy consumption for the next year, I can use this prediction either as a counterfactual. What the consumption would have been had the intervention not taken place. So you make a prediction, you compare with the actual, and you say the difference must be the impact of the intervention. And yes, that's what I said. Okay, this is a more graphical way to explain what it is. In reality, you say there are things that you observe, and you use for your model, things that you cannot observe, and either you proxy inside your model, or you hope that they will remain the same. As long as they remain the same, your model is fine. When this is said, that you don't observe changes, your model is irrelevant. How you can address it, IPVP has some ideas like the chain method, where you try to update your model all the time, which creates a large chain of models, which is a bit problematic. But anyway, this is a nice way for me to explain the traditional approach. And then we say that, okay, for the second version, let's do something different. Let's approach MMV as something that tries to compare before and after intervention, similar states and similar conditions. And the moment you have similarity between before and after, comparison will give you the impact, the difference that cannot be attributed to the intervention. So we have this idea of mapping variables and impact variables. Maybe it's just to very fast go through them. Mapping is anything that should be similar between and after, so I can compare. That's all it is. And if this mapping variables, such as weather, must be similar between and after. Occupancy schedule must be similar. Density of occupancy, how many people I have at full occupancy, for instance. This must be similar to compare. And if this changes, I must be able to adapt automatically. And then there are the impact aspects that you have to capture. You don't want to adapt to the changes. You want to capture the impact of the changes, like the U value of the building's envelope, and etc. There is this very simplified model. Just keep one idea that on the left are things that are activity related. They're related to what happens inside the building. On the right is aspects of the building itself. So just keep this. This will come up later. So what is the idea behind the methodology of SENSEI? You can have a very valid counterfactual model by comparing before and after conditions, similar conditions in terms of activity levels. And this is the left part. The activity levels and occupancy dependent variables. And one way to describe it, maybe it's too technical anyway, you can think of it as an autoencoder. Autoencoder is a fancy word to say that you have a model that takes something, creates a new feature, and then it constructs that something. And that can be consumption. So you have consumption, it uses to create a new feature, that's activity, and then it reconstructs consumption. And why we do this? We do this because we can actually have an MLV model by combining models that are trained before and after the intervention. So you have one such model before the intervention, one after, and then you just combine them. Visually, it looks like that. This is not prediction at all. This is something different. This is something that says, I'm trying to learn from both the data before and the data after the intervention and try to combine so that I correct the model that has been trained before the intervention with what I see after. This is definitely not prediction, but it's similar or even better. And what I mean by that, this all comes from the book that I mentioned, that has a series of examples that try to demonstrate that A, it makes sense, and B, it's not something to be scared of just because you are combining data before and after. And the yellow one is a pure predictive model. And what you would like to see, this is a very, very easy to predict building. So what you would like to see is that this approach comes close to it, but it's not artificially well. The last one that says with overfitting activity is an overfitting model. Overfitting models you cannot trust. So we can actually get that close to that, yes, which means it's safe to use it. Doesn't overfit means you can trust it. By the way, if you treat it as predictive model exclusively, because you can use it like that, it's also not that bad. If you take the data from the EVO portal, you will see that it's close to the best models. There's nothing in the left. All the others have zoomed. All the others are the right. So it's quite good in terms of both bias and error. One thing to keep in mind, two things. First, what we get from that? We ignore changes that can attribute it in activity levels. If the model sees a change in energy consumption, it can be explained by a change in activity, it doesn't describe it as impact, which is something that you want. Okay, if I close my office and I don't go there, Consumption goes down, but that doesn't mean that I have impact from intervention. I just change my activity. So it adapts to activity changes. It can also adapt to intermittent energy consumption. When it's very difficult to predict when you will consume. And there is an example in the book that shows it's easy to find what we should map before and after. And we demonstrate in the book that what it finds actually it's similar in reality. It can also adapt to changes, like for instance, less people or fewer people inside the building because of something like COVID-19 pandemic. If you see the plot, you have an area that happens before but not after. If you would say I want to map, how do I map? Well, it's smart enough to know what to map with and what to exclude. So we have created a book that describes the methodology in detail, has a lot of examples. It tries to argue that it makes sense. This is its first page. And also the tool is itself free online for everyone to test it. And yeah, I think I'm done.
So how does this align with privacy concerns?
MMV or the model specifically? The model specifically does not. MMV also is quite difficult to align it with privacy concerns because you need data for consumption. If you say that from the data you can infer things like activities and routines, it is true. But then again, it's a trade-off. You need this information to do something because you rely on understanding what happens inside the building in order to understand what is the impact of anything that actually changes through intervention. So the moment you say, I want to understand what happens, you prive. So privacy.
Maybe I can add, well, there's of course the privacy issue for sure for households. How we could solve it, for instance, is that we just say, well, we have here a P4P program, you can get money, but there is one condition that you share, given certain conditions, your data with us, and you fill in every half year a form, how many people are living in your house or something like that. And we will use it for certain purposes. So that's, I think, 100% compliant with European legislation concerning privacy, and it's an easy solution. I think so.
And anyways, we share a lot of data.
Yeah.
That's the good ones to share. Okay. Yeah. So let's move on to our last presentation for today before we move on to our last panel. So Monica, you're presenting the work you have done from the Generalitat de Catalunya. And we examined there how we could perhaps start setting up a first program.
Well, I'm coming from Generalitat of Catalunya, and I just present, I'm going to be very quickly just because I think that some of the things I will say, probably it's more interesting to discuss or let for the panel of discussion. I just talk about what are our motivations that are aligned with the European policies and all national policies too. Today challenges that are not only it's valid for Catalonia, but also valid for other regions, and what are the possible future scenarios. Just go quickly with this slide. We have the energy transition plan that it's divided in these 10 targets or these 10 goals, but I want to just mention these 4, the energy efficiency first. This is the main goal, the how empowering the citizens, the energy model, distribution, generation, self-supply, digitalization as smart grids, and new business and opportunities and job creation. I think these 4 are probably the main related with the P4P model, but also the other ones are also to eradicate the energy poverty. How we have started this implementation in 2017, we published the climate change law that we created a climate fund in order to guarantee that there is enough public budget for this kind of new, well, the grant subsidies and new kind of budget for this kind of renovation in buildings and renewable energy. But what are today's challenges? The energy potential and energy efficiency potential. What are our stakeholders, the strength and the weakness, and how we can governance as a public institution this map. I'm going to very quickly. Regarding the energy efficiency potential, this is the figures of the residential building stock in Catalonia. As it's similar, I think, in the rest of Europe, we have a lot very old building stock, concentrated in the range from the 16th and the 19th. And the big problem is that the poor construction quality. It means that the implementation of the new standard has been going very, very slowly, and probably we need to be more demanding on this kind of standards. Another thing that probably we mentioned, but during this conference, but probably we need to think, it's the role of this aggregator. The energy efficiency aggregator doesn't need only have financial skills, as Johan presented, but also have to to know what happens in buildings. This entity needs information to identify what are the buildings most appropriate or suitable for specific programs, how can classify them. They need, for example, any tool like MV or energy efficiency measures catalog with enough information to calculate this energy efficiency savings potential. And probably the idea is to go to be more accurate between the reality and the future savings. During SENSEI, we elaborate different deliverables. For example, the 4.3 elaborated by one of our colleagues, or the D5.1. They estimate different indicators. They studied different methods to evaluate these energy efficiency measures, and all of this kind of work try to be a tool for this aggregator in order to classify the buildings, probably by sector, probably by, I don't know, consumption, etc., and create what we need. It's to create this energy efficiency portfolio. Another important point during when we design a P4P program is we need the aggregator needs to know in advance what are the compensator rate, because at the end it will be specific information to calculate or to return the initial investment. I also go quickly within this slide. What are our strengths? We have also different laws. We have a climate change law. In Catalonia, we have a currently energy efficiency strategy in public buildings by 2022. Now it's going to elaborate another one. And this is managed by the Energy Agency, ICAEN. And we also started to implement tenders through these EPC models, and we have elaborated guidelines. At national level, there is also a similar energy efficiency fund that I mentioned later. It's also to gather money from the DCOs and the TCOs to promote the renovation activities. And probably one point of another actor important in all these on this model are the citizens, or probably the energy communities, and probably because are more focused now in energy renewable, but probably we need to also to include this energy efficiency concept as a energy resource to the net. And well, we also are working in an energy transition law, but it's not only the draft. But what are the weakness? We can discuss later in the panel, but it's no doubt that we have a limited initial budget, probably for public authorities, for individuals, for commercials. Everybody have a limited initial budget. This is the most negative point. Probably another one is the limited capacity of the public sector to encourage the private sector. Sometimes the private sectors go further than the private and the public, and sometimes we are not go around together. So probably we need to look for how to manage this. Even though we have also some EPC models or some existing tenders based on EPC models, are not enough, probably because, as some, I don't know who mentioned that, the problem is how, because we have these contracts for public buildings, but we wanted to aggregate different departments, for example, and it's not easy to work. Imagine if it's not easy to work in the same public authority with different departments. Imagine if we have to aggregate in the private sector or in different places. Another question that it's also mentioned today, questions about the rights and obligations on the part of the owner. Okay, the owner is the first beneficiary of this model, but of course, these actors have rights and obligations because, for example, the behavior, it's simple, it's a simple point, but if the behavior of the end users don't it's proper, probably we don't achieve the expected savings. So it's very important. We have a very lack training of P4P or other kind non-traditional energy efficiency models. We need to train on this matter. And database sources, how we share the data, and what about the data protection? We need to investigate how to facilitate this kind of sharing of data, and lack of evaluation and monitor culture. Even though we have installed different smart meters, or probably smart meters for each different appliances, okay, we need the information, but we need to learn. We need to understand this data that we are gathering, and probably a lot of building managers doesn't have enough tools to understand what happens in the building. Just very quickly, to identify the different actors from the market, building owners. We have the individuals, the private sector, the public sector, residential, education. All these have different needs, differences, motivations, the financial capacity. Another important task from the public authorities are these communication channels. It's not be the same to be in contact with the residential and all the commercial. Also the private and public and private institutions like energy efficiency, energy agencies, other universities, or the research centers that help us to elaborate these protocols and standards, and the sectorial clusters to have the direct feedback from the customers. Regarding the system operator, now currently the TCOs has these obligations to pay this energy efficiency fund. Now it's the possibility to create, well, in the future to work through certificates. And finally, these two, the investment providers, as mentioned during on other presentations today, and also again the last actor, not only the end users, but also these services or facilities managers that are the last actor to make possible these savings have been achieved. For example, the technical chambers and professionals acknowledge it's very important. About the governance, this is it's a picture where the public authorities could be this program aggregator, and the portfolio manager is the same, but probably at the second level. The program aggregator will look for this third-party investment, can make some agreements to guarantee the investment. And then the idea is that yes, more of the information that appears here is also commented in the today conferences. But there are two things I want to mention about this graph. One is as policymakers and governments can compel to the DCOs and the TCOs to share data, but not to share data, okay, because now they are sharing the data, but we need this data to be standardized in order that all different kind of producers can work with this data. But now probably the data that these DCOs and TCOs it's not standardized to work with them. And on the second point is the comfort of the end users. We are speaking only with energy benefits, but we need to feedback from the non-energy benefits from the end users. And finally, as Johan mentioned too, there are thoroughly first phase to implement these P4P models. The first where a GenCat or any public institution create this P4P program, this P4P scheme that then goes to the P4P program, regulate make the regulation, create a public procurement specific for this kind of agreement. How we can manage this? Probably we need to know how to manage this data. Different channels of communications, and define the compensation rate, but probably here in red, if we are talking from public budget, this could be very limited. And then have an energy efficiency aggregator. In the second phase, when the GenCat just is the facilitator, the public administration create a minimum content of this kind of programs. Then the agreements go alone between the different actors that of our model, of the SENSEI model. But we need to, as a public institution, we need to monitor if the results are aligned with the public policies and the public goals. And then, okay, the public communications from the private sector, try to the incentive in order to give the market this freedom to be more competitive. The incentive should be in the floor of the private sector, and the public administration have also to define the minimum requirements to be a energy efficiency aggregator. That's to play this role. Thank you.